right. Screen 1 says it's live. Screen 2 now says it's live. Brothers and sisters, I'll be streaming Professor Black Truth's latest piece that unfortunately I slept through. But I hope you enjoy it because I'm sure I will.
Subscribe to this YouTube channel, go ahead and hit the subscribe button now, along with the bell icon so you can be notified whenever a new video is posted. And if you're already subscribed, check and make sure that YouTube hasn't unsubscribed. And of course, be sure to give the video a like, as well as share it on your social media. The white supremacists hate that. Now, that said, you can tell when the bastards are feeling the heat. Whenever white supremacy has to take some L's, they immediately move to try to see if they can give themselves a couple of quickie wins, if there's some way that they can manufacture for themselves some sort of instantaneous, easy victory. And that's what we see going on right now. The enforcement arm of white supremacy is under pressure, and that pressure is not letting up. The police have gone from being untouchable to every time that they're getting called out, now they're getting arrested. It used to be, it took tons of protests and months to get one of the bastards arrested. Now what's happening is they're getting arrested as soon as they get fingered. The situation's going bad. The pendulum's swinging in the opposite direction. And the bastards are feeling the heat. Not just the enforcement arm of white supremacy, but also the white media who lied for them. Oh yeah, Jeffrey Toobin of CNN. This clown was the one who was saying that, well, the juries, they just believe the police. They just trust the police. That's that racist little bastard brag. At least he was before. That is, before his little penchant for indiscreet behavior, shall we say, on webcams was discovered. Oh, yeah, CNN had no problem putting that bastard on because he was repeating what the opinion of white supremacy is. That we need people to understand that it doesn't matter if the police are guilty of sin. It doesn't matter if they committed murder. All that matters is, people are on the side of the police. And the public would not even bother to ask, is that true? Well, if anybody did ask, is that true? The white media would be like, it's true that we said it. Oh, but that's not what's carrying the day. That's not what's actually prevailing. What's happening is the black grassroots are having the intended effect. And so the white media has been hard at work attempting to manufacture a counter narrative, one that hopefully will get the attention off of them. So we've seen this white media orgy of attention for alleged Asian hate crimes. There's been attacks on Asians. Most of this stuff has been a matter of anybody who even looks at an Asian the wrong way is accused of attacking them. But for the few times where there might have been somebody who had a minor altercation, in many cases it's either homeless people or these are just folks who are basically no different than you and me. But the white media is like, if it involves an Asian person, if it's a black person involved, if we can see if there's a black person anywhere in a 5-block radius, say that they were responsible, we got to find a way to dirty them up. And the white media and the DAs and such, you see that these guys are all working in tandem with each other. There's a program at work here. I told you about how earlier this week you had a situation where there was an Asian nail salon or beauty supply store where there was a black woman who got into an argument with one of the owners there, and apparently they came to blows or something. And you got the DA there who has charged this black woman with a hate crime. Now, whenever black people are attacked, there's never any talk of hate crimes. All the white media immediately comes in and says, well, the reason that they don't do it is because it's just so hard to prove. You can't blame the DA for not even trying. Sure, you had some white guy who shot a bunch of black folks while screaming nigger, nigger, but how do you prove that's a hate crime? That's not even worth bringing charges for, don't you know? But it wasn't just the woman in Houston who was accused of that. You also had another case in New York City, a homeless black man who apparently got into an altercation with some Asian woman, and no less than Cy Vance, one of the biggest, slimiest weasels in American prosecution. This bastard, he decides, we're gonna go ahead and bring some quickie hate crime charges against him. So what does that tell you? There's a program at work here. And by the way, Cy Vance, he's the same bastard who dismissed the charges against Amy Cooper. You remember her. She falsely called the police on a black man in Central Park. Oh, yes, Cy Vance decided, it would be very easy to give her a year in prison, but you know what? I'm going to tell the judge to dismiss the charges. Cy Vance was the one who moved to have the charges against Amy Cooper dismissed. They weren't dismissed by the judge, at least not at the judge's insistence. It was Cy Vance who said, Your Honor, we move that the charges be dismissed. Well, why is that? Well, we feel as if enough of the public's moved on to other headlines, and we think we got enough cover to go ahead and bury this. Sure, we could get a prosecution very easy. We could get a conviction real easy. But you know what? Poor Amy Cooper, she's been through enough already. Why? She's already done some court-appointed sessions with a psychotherapist, and we think 5 or 6 days that she had to sit in a chair and tell her troubles to some stranger. We think she's been through more than enough. See, Cy Vance wasn't trying to bring any hate crime charges against Amy Cooper, even though you had a blatant, bona fide hate crime case. As far as he was concerned, we got to bury this one quickly as possible. But now you got a situation where there's no grounds for hate crime anything, and Cy Vance is leading the charge. What does that tell you? Cy Vance, by the way, is the same scumbag who for years refused to prosecute Harvey Weinstein. That is, until after his 2017 scandal broke. The pressure from the grassroots is getting to the bastards. That's what's happening. So they're trying to manufacture some headlines because they know the white media will publicize it. The white media, who happens to be the official mouthpiece for these scumbags, for these animals, the white media is going to go ahead and spread all this stuff far and wide in the hopes of creating a counter narrative. Juries are not going back to letting the thugs in blue off the hook. They figured, after a while, all of this juries indicting the police and all of these grand jury revolts, the grand jurors who are demanding to tell what's actually happening in these grand jury sessions. Oh man, the DAs are finding themselves under pressure. It's bad enough that the thugs in blue can no longer depend on a jury to let them off the hook, not like they used to. But now the prosecutors themselves are finding the juries are in open revolt against them. They were terrified after what they saw go down in Kenosha. They were terrified after that. You got the grand jurors who are getting lawyered up and saying the DA lied in the grand jury process. The DA fixed the grand jury. The DA deliberately rigged the grand jury and told the grand jury not to indict. And the DAs, they rely on the secrecy of the grand jury process. Nobody knows what the hell is going on in these grand jury proceedings. And the DAs rely on that. That way they can bring charges against people who they shouldn't bring charges against, like the gentleman in New York or the lady in Houston. They can go ahead and say, why, you can't blame the DA for that. Why, we went to a jury of your peers, all white, by the way, and they were the ones who said that you need to be in prison. It wasn't anything. Come on. The only thing you have to prove in a grand jury proceeding is that the incident even happened. That's all you got to do. You got to prove that something happened. That's where the old legal expression that a prosecutor can get a grand jury to indict a ham sandwich came from. All you have to do is just simply prove that something happened. The grand juries are a DA's way of being able to avoid responsibility for what they themselves think of, and that they know that they're doing something that they shouldn't. Otherwise, just bring the doggone indictment. You don't need a grand jury for that. You can just bring the charges yourself. But on the other hand, if you've got some racist white supremacist who you know has murdered a black person, you're trying to figure out, I need some cover for not bringing charges, where you go to the grand jury with that, and you tell the grand jury, well, you guys shouldn't be bringing any sort of charges against them. Well, there's not enough here to actually do anything with. Why? Well, you could bring, you guys, you grand jury, you could bring some sort of charges, but I'll tell you right now, they wouldn't hold up in court. That's what Daniel Cameron did. And that's exactly what Bob McCullough did after the murder of Mike Brown. That's what these bastards always do. They go to the grand jury and say, well, if you guys are thinking of using your ability to indict Darren Wilson or to indict Daniel Pantaleo on your own, you could try that. But I'll tell you right now, since I'm the one who's going to be prosecuting the case, I don't think that'll work. I don't think it'll be successful at all. And I'm the one who's going to have to prosecute the case. So you can take my word for it when I say you won't come back with a guilty verdict. You wouldn't be able to get it. And I know you wouldn't, because I'll make sure you don't. So you got the DAs making it very clear that where the white supremacists are concerned, especially if they killed a black person, there's no such thing as a hate crime. It's too high a bar. The law doesn't apply. Meanwhile, if you get a black person who looks at someone the wrong way, well, we're going to bring hate crime charges against you. All of a sudden, they're not so afraid. Now, all of a sudden, they're not so hesitant. Now they can bring hate crime charges left, right, and center. So as we've been saying all along, the problem isn't that there's not enough evidence. The problem is you got these racist prosecutors who are essentially trying to enact what amounts to a nullification of hate crimes legislation. Oh, hate crimes legislation's on the books, but they're not about to actually enforce it. Unless they think they can gin up some sort of phony, baloney, false narrative against black people. And that's what this is about. This is not a jurisprudential operation that you see going on here. This is a media operation. Juries are breaking bad on both the police and on the racist prosecutors, and they're both desperately trying to find a way to get the heat off themselves. They have to change the headline. Now, sure, changing the headline is not going to make it where the juries are suddenly going to say, oh, yeah, we're going to go ahead and ignore these cops killing black folks anymore. That's not, they don't think that that's going to stop the push for justice necessarily, but at the very least, if the white media and the DA and the cops, if they all get together to push a lie, this phony media hoax, then they're hoping at the very least it's going to give them some breathing room. This is all phony as a $3 bill, and they know it, but this is about trying to win some sort of media war. As Richard Nixon himself said, this game isn't played by the rules, it's played by the headlines. And while they do know that even the white media, as pervasive and as much as they are able to saturate and carpet bomb the public with whatever false headlines they want, they still know, okay, the white media may be ubiquitous to the point where they can saturate the public in phony headlines. But even though they can't tell people what to think, they can at least tell people what they ought to be thinking about. They can have a large amount of influence over what is front of mind for the public. What's at the front of the public consciousness today? The enforcement arm of white supremacy is slowly but surely being broken. And so a massive operation to preserve that enforcement arm and to try to find a way to repair it, to mend it, to try to bring it back. Let's get the heat off of us so we can get the headlines changed and try to do some quickie rehabilitation of the thugs and blues image. Or at the very least, hopefully the public will move on to something else. The white media will gin up some phony outrage against the very people who the police are killing. That's the point they have to reach. Change the headlines, but get the headlines not just off of the police, but you got to get the headlines onto the very people who the police are murdering. This is what you see, particularly Republicans. Both parties engage in this, but particularly the Republicans. One thing that they always try to do, whenever you point out how the Republicans are doing dirt, first thing that they try to do, some half-baked attempt to say, no, you shouldn't be looking at us. You should be looking at the very people who are accusing us. They're the lawbreaker. It's an old con game, but we see them running it because that's all they got. They're trying to, these headlines are meant to push a racist media narrative, and the narrative is meant to create a false equivalence in the minds of the public. They're trying to preserve the perpetuation of anti-black violence. They got to keep that going. We got to keep making sure everybody understands when black people are killed, it's justified. Okay, we tried dirtying up the victims, but that backfired. And the public's now looking and going, you can't do that anymore. We don't care. We're not listening to you. So we're going to try a new one. We're going to do the same thing, just more of it. We're going to turn it up to 10, and we're just going to be blatant about it. Because a lot of the white supremacists who you see posting their asinine comments and such, well, these guys, they're starting to lose heart. Morale is starting to fail and flag among the rank and file white supremacists. So the white media has to go ahead and tell them, hey, we're banging the drum hard as hell. We're going to bang the drum, and hopefully you guys will understand. You guys will feel a little bit encouraged. You'll feel a little bit emboldened by that. See, the goal of this phony hate crime hoax is to get society to give a wink and a nod to the killing of black people. The momentum is with the black grassroots. The police lost any momentum they may have pretended to have a long time ago. In fact, they didn't really have any momentum at all. It was just a matter of the public had not reached a critical mass as far as outrage goes. This is a marathon, not a sprint. The white media, with CNN and MSNBC and Fox all pushing the exact same lie that, well, all that matters is what was the nigger accused of? And we're not going to question the cops. We're not going to ask if these cops who are killing black folks have a history of disciplinary problems. Daniel Pantaleo murdered Eric Garner, but we're not going to ask or even tell the public that Daniel Pantaleo was sued successfully for both racial profiling and police brutality years before he murdered Eric Garner. We're not going to tell the public about that because, well, that would make it seem like Daniel Pantaleo was a criminal and wrong. Timothy Loman murdered Tamir Rice, but we're not going to tell the public that Timothy Loman was also had to be fired, basically fired and all but named from the Independence Police Department before he got his job with the Cleveland PD and murdered Tamir Rice, because if we did that, well, that would make him seem like he's in the wrong. So the cops are always have clean records, or at the very least, we're not going to make a big deal out of it, which the white media hopes would leave the public with a false impression that, well, these cops must be clean. Otherwise, the media would have told us about disciplinary problems. They would have told us about any dirt that these guys were doing. They would have told us that these guys had complaints or prior crimes that they were part of. That's how you get people trying to, the white media does that deliberately so that they can preserve the talking point that, well, the cops do are dangerous. They're hard work. No, that's the biggest lie on the face of the planet. And of course, Derek Chauvin, who had also taken part in the murder of a black man before he murdered George Floyd. Every time you look up at these cops, you find that these guys have a history of violence, if not murder outright. And yet the white media says nothing about that because that's the entire point. Create the false idea. But of course, if there's anything about loose cigarettes, even if it had nothing to do with the events on the day that Eric Garner was murdered, we're going to mention that anyway. And if the medical examiner says that so-and-so, he might have been taking drugs, well, that's all you're going to hear about. That is until the medical examiner takes the stand in the George Floyd trial and says, no, it was the police who murdered him after all. Drugs had nothing to do with it. Then the white media is like, brush that under the rug. We're not saying anything about that. Eric Garner, the medical examiner, said it was a chokehold that murdered him and nothing else. Well, the white media is not saying anything about that. So yeah, that's the entire point. They're being blatant about it because that is the job. That's what they're attempting to do. It's a lie that somebody has to repeat 24/7 and try to cover up anything and everything to the contrary. The truth, on the other hand, speaks for itself and doesn't need to conceal anything. Momentum is a very powerful thing. When you've got the wind at your back, you've got the advantage. But when you've lost it, you're fighting an uphill battle. Every victory fuels the next victory, and every defeat fuels the next defeat. And what do you do when you have a situation where the very public that you're depending on to rubber stamp your tyranny and oppression, they turn on you? Then what do? That's the reason why you got all these police and prosecutors who are all peeing their pants, because they see that people in the public are actually going to the houses of these killer cops. In other words, they're making it clear, we're not even looking to the DAs and such. We're not going to play the game of wait to see what the DAs are going to do. The public's like, we demanded that these people be punished, and that's going to be the end of it. This is what happens when you decide that you're going to cultivate and nurture an environment and a climate of utter lawlessness. White supremacy is the opposite of justice. White supremacy is the opposite of law and order. White supremacy is tyranny and control. And what happens is the people are looking and going, hey, if the people who are supposed to be, who claim that they're upholding the law, are in fact breaking it all the time and deciding they're going to give themselves a license to kill, we are under no obligation to sit there while you got worms, weasels, and liars like Cy Vance who decide that they're going to be joining in with the white supremacists every 5 seconds. The public has no obligation to sit on their hands while hate criminals walk the streets and the DA decides that he's going to be selectively prosecuting phony baloney cases against homeless people, when the only thing somebody needs is actually get mental help. That's what these people actually need. These folk who the white media is trying to make some phony issue out of. They need to have mental help. The guy in New York who Cy Vance is trying to gin up a case against, Brandon Elliott, he's a homeless guy. What the hell are you doing going after homeless people. These people, what they need in most cases is to get some sort of psychological help. A lot, if not most of the people who are homeless are there due to some sort of underlying psychological condition. If somebody's having a mental health crisis, they need treatment, not incarceration. And that's exactly what the case would be if the person being accused of assault had been white. Remember that case in San Francisco last month, that Stephen Jenkins character who attacked a little old Asian woman and her husband? He socked both of them in the eye, but that old Asian woman fought back and beat the guy bloody. Well, you won't be surprised to learn that he also, according to his attorney, is a homeless man and apparently has a history of mental illness. Gee, neither sounding familiar yet, except the thing is, the San Francisco DA, they've hit the guy with 6 charges, none of them a hate crime, by the way. He's been charged with basically simple assault, abuse of the elderly, basically, in other words, the stuff that carries any time, if anything at all. They made it a point, we're not hitting this guy with any hate crime, anything. Yeah, because he's not the right color. This is about manufacturing a narrative. That's what this is about. We're not trying to have any white folks caught in this. We need to have a black face associated with it, and we're going to make sure that black people are associated with it because we're going to target black people for it. If their damn grand juries won't do what we want as far as letting the cops off the hook, if they start going after the DAs, if the grand juries refuse to cooperate with the DA's railroading of innocent black people, or if they decide that they're not going to cooperate with the DA letting the thugs and blue off the hook, in that case, then we're going to go ahead and start trying to manufacture some cases against black people, and we're going to do everything that we can to counter those headlines against the police with trying to put some out there for black people, because this is what white supremacy always does. Oh, you got some white supremacists who got caught? Well, we're going to try to throw a black face in there just because. This is desperation on their part. You should take heart from this, because this is what the bastards do when you get desperate. When you get to the end, this is what you wind up doing. But as black people, we cannot be sitting here playing defense against these minions of white supremacy. The Cy Vances and the other assorted garbage who are deciding that they're going to be prosecuting an anti-black race war from behind a prosecutor's office. These people cannot be allowed to be continuing this. You got people who are proving that they can hold the police to account. These DAs who are deciding that they're going to be selectively pushing these nuisance cases against black people for the sake of manufacturing headlines so they can get the heat off their thug and blue buddies, these guys have to also be called to account. This is the danger of allowing the white media to be dictating everything. This is why you have to support the new black media. You got to support these black voices that are speaking on your behalf. Otherwise, you get all this off-kilter crap. Told you a couple of days ago about how nothing but Caucasians, NBC, they're putting together a so-called special, which is going to be hosted by Sierra and America's favorite simp, Russell Wilson, to tell black folks to go and get the vaccine. We need to vax the blacks. That's what we need to do. Rolling Stone magazine gave a list of the people who are supposed to be co-hosting this little whatever. And you couldn't help but notice that when you look at the list of names, black folks ain't the 13 or so % of the population, but you wouldn't know it looking at the list of the people who are supposed to be helping them do their little co-hosting for this star-studded event. Half of them are black. Barack Obama is supposed to be there. Michelle Obama, of course. Sierra, Russell Wilson, Charles Barkley, Shaquille O'Neal, Sterling K. Brown, Jennifer Hudson, Wanda Sykes. For God's sake, I'm sitting here looking at this and going, gee, I seem to see a pattern forming here. But that's the whole point. What they think to themselves is if they bring out that empty suit Barack Obama, then black folks are going to be looking and going, ooh, I've got to do anything that Obama tells me to do. They would have been better off bringing nobody at all as opposed to bringing Obama. Obama has no cred with black folks. Black folks look at him and anywhere that he goes to, black people are like, forget that. So this is just another case of the white media, as usual, throwing crap against the wall to see if anything sticks. They're at least 10 to 20 years behind the times. It takes them a long time to figure out that they've lost some of these fights they keep picking. They're doing the old, we're going to dictate to black people what they should think. That's not going to help. Black folks are standing for themselves and thinking with their own minds. You're not going to tell black people what to do. And if black people tell you, well, I got some reservations about that, then you have no choice but to listen because you can't force the issue. Oh, yeah, the white media want to tell black folks, what's wrong with you niggers? Taking some wait and see approach with these vaccines. God dang it, you better get your black behinds in line and get the shot. Now we got Johnson & Johnson with all these blood clots running around. And all of a sudden, the black folks who were going, I ain't so sure. We need to wait and see if there's any complications from these shots first before we all go line up for this. Now what's happening is they're not looking so crazy, and the white media has no answers other than to scream the same old platitudes, just more of it. Not listening to anyone, we're just going to tell you what you need to do. And if bringing out some corny black doctor to do some asinine comparison between the coronavirus and gangbangers or whatever the hell that little sideshow was, if that didn't do it, if dragging out some hand-picked Negroes from the Biden administration to say, oh, this is just fine, if that doesn't do, we'll bring out a slew of every Negro entertainer you ever heard of, and we'll even drag Obama's raggedy behind for whatever San Francisco bathhouse he's been hiding in. And surely that will do. We'll just dump a whole bunch of black folks out there. Again, the white media's little playbook, the same thing, just more of it. Yeah, the white media can give Charles Barkley or Barack Obama or Russell Wilson. They can give these clowns some airtime, but what the white media is finding is they cannot give these cherry-picked Negroes legitimacy. These guys are not going to be pointing and saying, y'all ought to do what we tell you to do. You got to listen to black folks. If you decide you're not going to, fine, but you then don't get to turn around later and say, why aren't black people doing what we tell them to do? It don't work like that. The white media is realizing that they're reaching basically the limits of their ability to be able to dictate to the public what the public should think, especially black people, on issues of substance. Yeah, for the infotainment stuff, who's beefing with who in the world of hip-hop, the Real Housewives of Who Gives a Damn, sure, they still got some influence there. But white supremacy is not based on its ability to get people to be distracted with meaningless fluff. That's a core component of it, but that's not what it's based on. White supremacy is based on its ability to keep black people under control. And that control is beginning to weaken. All of the guarantees of what the outcomes would be from white supremacy pulling this or that hoax or telling the public, oh, well, no matter what you saw, it doesn't matter. It's the only system that we got. People are like, no, there are other ways to deal with criminality other than looking to Cy Vance and other corrupt racists to see them decide they're going to spit on the rights of black people to live. There are other ways to deal with criminality other than appealing to a bunch of dyed-in-the-wool white supremacists who have already made it clear that they are part of the very apparatuses that are attacking black people. They are collaborators with the killers and assailants of black people. There are other ways. The white media will have to throw in the towel on this little defamation jihad against black people, not because they want to, but simply because at the end of the day, they're not going to be spending forever on something that clearly is not giving any sort of returns. They need something that actually is going to work, but the problem is reality and the facts are on the side of black people. No amount of phony baloney manufactured headlines are going to be able to overwhelm the truth. You can have Cy Vance selectively decide that he suddenly realizes, oh, there is such a thing as a hate crime statute, and I'm going to misapply it to these black people over here because I got to help get the heat off the thugs in the NYPD. We can go ahead and try that. Won't get very far. The kind of wins that they need in order to restore what up until now had been largely immunity from law for the thugs in blue, you're not going to get that through these phony baloney cases that keep throwing to black folks. A couple of homeless people in New York, some black woman who simply had an argument with an Asian store owner. That's not how you restore the cops' immunity from prosecution. That's not how you get the public to say, well, we're going to give a wink and a nod to the thugs in blue. That's not how you make it where prosecutors can look at the grand jury and go, hey, we're all on the same page. We're all going to maintain the conspiracy of silence, right? You're not going to be able to repair the control that's been broken here through some phony cherry-picked hate crime cases that everybody knows are fake as a $3 bill. That's not how you repair this one. Hell, these measures are so weak and inconsequential, I barely can dignify calling them damage control. So how exactly do you repair this situation for the thugs in blue? How does white supremacy repair this one? If the black media and the black grassroots that we represent have our way, they never will. Because although the white media may think to themselves, this game is played by the headlines, what they don't realize is that day has passed. The thugs in blue who are getting themselves finally held to some sort of account, the beginning of a pushback against police immunity for killing black people, that wasn't caused because the white media got on board with it. It wasn't caused by a plethora of favorable headlines. They were still lying and using their headlines to dignify and to justify the murder of black people all the time. They had not stopped. What changed is they realized the public was looking and going, okay, we're not listening to the media here. We see what the media is trying to do. All of their attempts and ploys to justify the killings of black people have backfired. It's not a matter of they were working. It wasn't working. It's like these white supremacist idiots who think to themselves that if they just bomb into people's comment sections with their white supremacist talking points, that's going to mean something. I forget the name of that little scumbag inbred trailer park creep who was running around in Charlottesville saying, we're the KKK, we've been on the internet pushing our memes, pushing your memes. Give me a break. Memes are what you do when you're dealing with video game influencers on Twitch or Instagram. Memes are what you do for that crowd. When you're trying to get things done in the real world, well, Gil Scott Heron said it 50 years ago, and it's still true today. The revolution will not be televised, and it won't be streamed either. You see, what the black grassroots has been doing is offline, not online. Online is where you gather people. Offline is where you put the pressure on the bastards. And that's what we've been doing. So while the white supremacists are still pursuing the old, decrepit, and ineffective strategy, such as it was, of we're trying to win the headlines. We're trying to figure out how to carpet bomb you with memes. We think to ourselves that if we can get you to hear our memes, that will mean something. And what they're finding is it doesn't. Because people are actually considering the source. And the sources, in the case of the white media, they've delegitimized themselves. And in the case of these white supremacist nimrods on the internet, they never had legitimacy to begin with. We've dug in for the long haul. We meant what we said. Though in a closing comment, I would say that for the young woman in Houston, the lesson that black folks should take away from that is we're not supposed to be running around patronizing businesses that make it a point that they're going to discriminate against black people in the first place.
That's
or that
right.
They're not going to be doing business with black businesses.
That's right.
You must balance the taken with the given. We should only do business with people who do business with us. And if there are people or groups who decide that they're systematically going to refuse to do any business with black people, well, in that case, then we're just going to decide we're not doing business with you until you change your ways. That's the name of that tune. So while we can point out that obviously the prosecutors down in Houston are selectively trying to push an anti-black narrative, we see that these prosecutors across the country, they put their little pinheads together, they put their little empty little eggheads together, and this is the best they've come up with. While we do call out the scam, we do see through their ploy, we also have to see that as black folks, we have got to be on code. And on code doesn't mean that we patronize businesses that don't patronize us.
That's right.
There's an economic reality there, and it is one that we do not ignore. That said, family, understand the little plan that these idiotic DAs think that they're going to do. And I've been telling you for the longest time, dealing with the police and putting pressure on them, that's just the beginning of what the grassroots is supposed to be doing. You keep in mind these DAs and prosecutors, breaking the enforcement arm of white supremacy, bracing the bastards, putting the arm on them. There are three groups that are going to have the arm put on them hard. There's going to be the police, the DAs, and the judges. Because without them, that whole thing falls apart. They have to be put under maximum pressure so that they understand they're being watched. They're not getting away with anything. That's what happened with Tim McGinty. He thought he got away with aiding and abetting the murder of Tamir Rice, but he didn't. Anita Alvarez thought she got away with aiding and abetting the murder of Laquan McDonald, but she didn't. Angela Corey thought she got away with aiding and abetting the murder of Trayvon Martin, but she didn't. See, when it came time to deal with them at the polls, they were dealt with. But the thing to be remembered here is they're not the only ones. They're thinking to themselves, these DAs are hoping to themselves that, well, if there's attention on the police, at the very least, we may have to sacrifice 1 or 2 foot soldiers, but ultimately we can save the entire gaggle of white supremacists.
No,
we got to show them that they can't.
DAs,
we see what the DAs are attempting to do.
Judges,
it's not a matter of merely knowing the name of 1 or 2 particular race soldiers who pull the trigger. You got to also look at the support apparatus that's behind it. There's absolutely no place in Black empowerment or among the Black grassroots for being intellectually lazy. If you can memorize the name of every one of your favorite rappers or every one of your favorite booty twerk dancers or whatever, then you also need to be figuring out the names of the people who are trying to kill you.
Jackpot.
You need to know who they are too. Because the way to make sure that you deal with these racist creeps like Cy Vance who are trying to push this phony, lying, racist, anti-Black narrative, the way that you deal with them is to make sure that they get punished at the polls, that they get punished in every way possible within the bounds of the law, and you also make sure that they understand why. Everyone knows why. The bastards may get the first word, hell, they may even get the loudest word. But justice, the Black grassroots, we always get the last one.